people who identify legitimately as animals.
A female wolf.
A female wolf.
From news.com.au. I've got news for you.
Well, I tell you what, I've met a lot of fascinating people through this podcast, but today's guest would have to be the most unique. Her name is Naia Ōkami, and years ago she went viral when she made this confession in a documentary.
On all levels except physical, I am a wolf.
So yes, Naia identifies as a wolf, okay? And in today's episode, she's going to explain what exactly that means. She'll reveal how her friends and family reacted to that news. And she'll also tell us what happened when she met with a pack of biological wolves. Now, if all of that's not enough for you, I also had a go at howling and got Naia to rate my performance.
You're the best howler who's interviewed me.
I bet you can't wait to hear me howl. You heard her, I'm actually quite good.
They say you should never judge a book by its cover, and when it comes to our next guest, that couldn't be more true.
Naia Ōkami may look like a human, but she identifies as a wolf.
Well, she sure does, and I'm thrilled to say that Naia joins me now all the way from Seattle in the United States. Naia, can you start by explaining how exactly you identify as a wolf?
So spiritually and psychologically, I sort of identify as a wolf. But I know I'm human. You know, I walk on two legs. I've got a job. I've got a career. My partner is human. So there's a level of, there is some identification there as a wolf. And then there's a level of, but I also know that I'm in a human body. I'm physically human and I'm functioning in society as a human.
So how old were you when you came to the realization that spiritually you're a wolf?
I think I was around age 10 or 11. I didn't really have the language for it, so I just kind of went around and, you know, I would tell people I'm close to, oh, hey, I've got the spirit of the wolf, but I didn't really have a word or a term for it, so I kind of went around doing that. I hung around in the furry community for a while because I thought, you have to understand, I thought that's what I was. I thought, okay, furries, these are people who have animal spirit. That's why they're, you know, dressing up in fursuits as animals. Oh, cool, this is like me. And then they were like, you're something completely different entirely. And I'm like, gotcha. So what is that exactly? And that's sort of how I found the term Therian and otherkin, which is kind of what I use to describe myself.
Okay, well, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely familiar with those terms. Can you just explain them for me?
A Therian is somebody who identifies as one or more non-human animals that have either once walked the earth or currently walk the earth. So the term otherkin just refers to non-human. So if you have someone who, whatever reason, they identify with mythical elves, for example, just to throw an example out there, they would use the term otherkin, whereas if you identify with an earthly animal, you would use the term Therian.
From what I've read, there are 3 main species of wolves and about 40 subspecies. Do you identify as a particular subspecies?
Yes, I am a British Columbia wolf.
What are their traits?
So British Columbia wolves, I believe, are a subspecies of gray wolves. They, of course, are native sort of to the northern areas, British Columbia. They're coastal wolves. And I kind of identify, you know, just going through and how I see myself and kind of looking through the different types of wolves there are. It just feels like the best fit.
How did your friends and family react when you told them that you were identifying as a wolf?
I mean, some people obviously raise their eyebrows, but it's not really that different if you really think about it. What does it change about your interaction with me? If I'm at work and you know, I'm doing something at work and I need to do a task or I need to do a whatever, the fact that I identify as a wolf doesn't change my professional performance. It doesn't change how I interact with coworkers, etc. It's an interpersonal, spiritual thing, and the people who are overreacting to it, it's like, okay, it doesn't affect you any. So,
do you exhibit any wolf behaviors, or do you mimic any wolf behaviors? You said that you obviously walk on 2 legs, but do you ever howl or anything like that?
I've been told I can howl very well, yes.
Could you give me a demo?
Oh, of course.
Okay, that's impressive. Have you met any other people who identify as wolves?
Yes, mostly online in Therian communities. I actually run one such community called Kinmunity, which is a pun on otherkin and community, KINMUNITY.com. So I've met a lot online. I've met a couple in real life. A lot of people are under the misconception that because I'm a wolf Therian, that obviously when I make friends or when I socialize, it's going to be with other wolf Therians. And I found that not to necessarily be the case. There's a lot of facets to who I am, a lot of facets to my identity. And just because you're also a wolf Therian doesn't mean that we necessarily share the same common interests, etc. So generally, I'll socialize with people who I'm more like in those ways.
What about dressing up as a wolf? Do you ever do anything like that?
I don't have a fursuit or anything. There's been times where when I go, I do appearances at Comic-Cons and stuff. And I'll wear an ear and a tail to Comic-Con occasionally. I mean, who wouldn't, right? I mean, everyone's in cosplay at Comic-Con. But that's about the extent of it.
That was Naia Ōkami. She spiritually and psychologically identifies as a British Columbia wolf.
Now, Naia, I would love to know, have you met with any, real life wolves? And if so, did you find that you formed a bond with them?
Yes, I've went to a wolf preserve and interacted with the wolves there, volunteered a couple times at preserves. I feel there is definitely a bond. Do I feel it's supernatural or any more bonding than a wildlife professional may do with an animal they study intentionally? No. Obviously I can interact with wolves on the level that any human being who studies wolves can interact with wolves. I'm not claiming to be anything special or magical because of that. Obviously, if I volunteer at a preserve and I'm involved in wolf care, those wolves are going to have some sort of bond to me. That's just normal.
You mentioned earlier that you have a partner. How do they feel about the fact that you identify as a wolf?
It doesn't really affect things. The fact that I identify this way, it doesn't affect our relationship. We don't even really need to talk about it, right? It's an interpersonal thing. That's really just for me. I share a lot about it. I'm very open about it because that's just how I am as a person. But I found in relationships and in friendships, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. I'm interested in tech, for example. I can make friends in the tech field without really even having to mention the wolf thing. That's not a forefront of those interactions.
And have you copped any flack or, abuse for being so open about the fact?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Oh, yes. People can be very hateful to things they don't understand. On top of being a Therian, I'm transgender, which is completely different, not even in the same league. Spiritual identity versus a very, very visual, you can tell that I've transitioned if you knew me before and you know me now. So I've gotten a lot of hate for being trans, a lot of hate for being a Therian, but I don't really care. There's plenty of reasons to hate a person. If you're going to hate me because I'm blunt and I said something that offended you or I did something wrong, which everyone's done something wrong once in a while, awesome. There's a valid reason to not like me. But if you're going to dislike me because of just an identity or a trait that's not hurting you or anybody else, I don't really need you in my life anyway.
Finally, I mean, some people listening might be going, gee, that's a bit weird. I can't quite understand it. Perhaps Naia has, issues or mental health issues. What would you say to those people?
Mental health issues are judged by how they're affecting your performance in society. Are they affecting your daily living skills? Are they affecting your ability to have a career? Are they affecting interpersonal relationships? And being a Therian does on its own none of these things. Are there people who have taken it way too far to the point where, if you go to work and you're barking at your coworkers, clearly that's in the realm of causing some sort of problem. But most Therians don't do that. I don't do that. It's not really affected me negatively. I said at the beginning of the interview, I walk on two legs. I know I'm a human. I work in investigations. I'm a damn good investigator. And being a wolf, it not only doesn't hinder my ability to do that, I think it helps, because when I'm going after predators and what I do for a job, I go after people who harm animals and children. I get to feel like a wolf hunting my prey, and my prey happens to be humans who are doing bad things.
No, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on I've Got News for You.
Thank you. May I depart with a howl?
Absolutely. Should I try and howl with you?
Oh, yes. I'd love to hear you howl.
All right, let's do it on the count of three, okay?
All right.
1, 2, 3. Oh.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
You're the best howler who's interviewed me. A few people who have interviewed me, they're like, oh, I'm going to howl with you. You actually did a decent one, so.
You have no idea how much that means to me. Naia, thank you so much for chatting.
Thank you.
Now, if you're feeling a little bit confused, let's just have a quick refresher on the difference between Therian and Otherkin. So here's what Naia had to say earlier.
A Therian is somebody who identifies as one or more non-human animals that have either once walked the earth or currently walk the earth. So the term Otherkin just refers to non-human. So if you have someone who, whatever reason, they identify with mythical elves, for example, just to throw an example out there, they would use the term Otherkin, whereas if you identify with an earthly animal, you would use the term Therian.
Okay, well now it's time to welcome Professor Carol Cusack from the University of Sydney, who's an expert in these subcultures. Carol, I guess the big question is why? Why do people identify as Otherkin and Therian?
That's a really great question. And I guess there are three ways to sort of answer it. The first is that human beings throughout the entirety of their existence have been fascinated by the idea that some people aren't just people and can transform into something else, can be something more magical. And so if we look at Chinese mythology and legend, or, ancient Greek or Mesopotamian mythology, we find characters that have this capacity. So the first thing would be that it's like a constant in human history. There have always been beliefs about people who were partly animal or partly mysterious legendary being. So that's point one. Point two is that since, say, 1960, Western culture in particular has been immensely saturated by popular media. And so the depiction of dragons and elves, orcs and fairies has become much, much more dominant in our general popular culture vocabulary and our kind of lexicon of symbolic images. It's not surprising that the first kind of otherkin movement, or the movement that's usually thought to be the ancestor of the otherkin, which is the elven movement, was very closely associated with people who drew their values and their spirituality from J.R.R. Tolkien.
They have feelings, my friend. The elves began it, waking up the trees, teaching them to speak.
The third point is that in the 21st century, it's quite widely accepted, especially in Western culture, that to some extent your identity is something that you build, you can construct yourself, and you're not limited by the identity that you have when you're born, like your birth family, your religion, everything. You can actually work on the project of the self and craft yourself as someone else.
Do we know how big this movement is? Do we have an idea of how many Otherkin people there are?
Not really. There are a couple of reasons for that too. One of the big things is, of course, that in the late 60s, when the Elven movement got going, those people all knew each other in person, and they mostly lived in countercultural parts of America and Europe to a lesser extent. Nowadays, people who identify as Otherkin or Therianthropes are often part of online communities. That's not to say that real-world communities don't exist, but it's not easy to give an estimate of how many people would be involved.
Some people listening right now might be going, well, if someone identifies as a fairy or an elf, they might not be quite right in their head. What would you say to that?
I would say that we've got a pretty flat sort of idea about what people are like and what people are able to think of and to do. If you take an imaginative viewpoint, there's no reason why such a person would be any more mentally unwell than, a person who doesn't identify as a fairy or an elf. I started off as a historian of the Middle Ages, and of course, in the Middle Ages, it was very, very common. People thought God spoke to them and the saints spoke to them, and they saw miraculous beings like angels all the time. It doesn't mean that they were deranged or mentally ill. It means that the kind of culture of their world encouraged that sort of understanding of what happened. So if you saw something amazingly beautiful, you wouldn't think, I, the subject, like we would, the individual, am looking at something amazingly beautiful. You'd think, God has revealed this beautiful thing to me. So it's just a different way of thinking.
Well, there you go. That was a little bit different today, wasn't it? Would love to hear your thoughts about this whole topic. Personally, I kind of think, if it's not harming anyone, then why not, huh? Good on them, I say. And good on you for listening to I've Got News for You. Lovely segue by me.